It was an evening like many others in the city. The streets were calm, and the orange glow of the setting sun made the buildings look almost golden. Students were walking out of their evening classes, some heading to nearby cafes, some laughing with their friends, and some, like Emily, just wanting to go home after a long day. Emily was a bright, hard-working girl in her early 20s. She was studying social sciences at the local college, and her dream was to work in a field where she could help people who felt powerless. Her teachers admired her dedication, and her friends often described her as gentle and determined. That night, she had stayed longer at the library, working on a research paper. By the time she stepped outside, the air was cool, and the streets were quieter than usual. She pulled her jacket tighter and began walking the familiar path toward her apartment. The route wasn't far, and she usually felt safe. She liked walking alone because it gave her time to think. She replayed conversations from class in her head, thought about her upcoming exams, and reminded herself of the calls she needed to make to her family. It was a peaceful routine that always calmed her after a busy day. But as she walked down one particular street, she noticed a police car parked near the corner. At first, she didn't think much of it. Police cars often drove around that part of town, checking for trouble. She kept walking, her bag slung across her shoulder, her steps steady. She had no reason to feel nervous. After all, she wasn't doing anything wrong. Still, there was something unusual about the way the officers inside the car were staring at her. She felt their eyes following her every move. Trying to ignore it, she focused on her phone, scrolling through her messages. But within moments, the car door opened, and two officers stepped out. Their expressions were serious, and the sound of their heavy boots echoed against the pavement as they approached her. Emily paused, unsure of what to do. She stopped near a lamp post, clutching her bag tighter. One of the officers asked her where she was going. She answered politely, explaining that she was heading home after class. But instead of letting her pass, they continued questioning her. The questions grew strange. They asked if she had been somewhere she had never even heard of, and if she knew certain people she had never met. Emily tried her best to stay calm, answering honestly, but her voice shook slightly from confusion. Why were they so interested in her? She had nothing to hide, yet the tone in their voices made her feel as if she were already guilty of something. As the minutes passed, the atmosphere became heavier. The once friendly evening walk had turned into an interrogation she had never expected. Emily felt her heart beat faster. She thought about calling her parents or even a friend, but she didn't want to upset them or make the officers think she was resisting. She tried to keep her tone respectful, hoping the situation would end soon. The street around her was not completely empty. A few people were standing near shops, some waiting for buses. They noticed what was happening, though most stayed quiet, watching from a distance. Emily felt a mix of embarrassment and fear. She wondered if anyone would step forward to say something on her behalf, but no one did. People often preferred to stay out of situations that involved the police, even if something didn't feel right. The sky grew darker, and the street lights flickered on. Emily could see her reflection faintly in the window of the police car, her worried eyes, her tense shoulders. She thought about her paper in her bag, the one she had worked on so carefully. She thought about her dreams, about how hard she had been trying to build a good future. All of it seemed so fragile in that moment, standing on the side of the street with two officers who didn't trust her words. What unsettled her most was the uncertainty. She didn't know what they wanted from her. She didn't know why they had stopped her, and that lack of clarity made her feel powerless. She reminded herself silently that she had done nothing wrong, that she was just a student walking home. But repeating those words inside her mind did not make the uneasiness go away. After a while, one of the officers looked at her bag and asked her to open it. Emily hesitated for a second, then carefully unzipped it, showing her books, notes, and laptop. The officer flipped through her things quickly, not really paying attention to what was inside. It felt less like a search and more like a display of authority. Emily swallowed hard, wishing the whole encounter would end soon. She glanced at the people nearby. Some had taken out their phones, quietly recording. That gave her a small sense of comfort. At least someone would see what was happening. She hoped that if anything went wrong, there would be proof that she had not provoked the situation. The minutes stretched on, each second heavier than the last. Emily stood under the streetlight, her mind racing with thoughts of safety, her future, and the strange turn her evening had taken. She had left the library just wanting to get home, but now she was caught in a moment that felt unreal. She could sense that something bigger was about to unfold, though she couldn't yet imagine just how shocking the next few minutes would be. The officers exchanged glances as if deciding what to do next. Emily noticed the faint sound of engines in the distance, cars approaching quickly. At that point, she didn't realize that help was already on the way, that her painful confusion would soon be interrupted by an arrival no one on that street had expected. And so, her ordinary evening was about to turn into a story that would spread far beyond that neighborhood, a story of power, injustice, and unexpected justice that would unfold right before everyone's eyes. The questions from the officers did not stop. Emily kept answering, her voice soft but steady, yet it felt like they were not really listening. No matter what she said, they twisted her words, as if they had already decided she was suspicious. She tried to remind herself that she had nothing to fear, but their sharp tone made her feel smaller with each passing second. One officer asked her to repeat her story again, where she was coming from, where she was going, what she had been doing all day. Emily repeated everything carefully, hoping they would understand she was just a student returning home after studying. But the officer frowned, as though her answers weren't good enough. It was as if they wanted to find a problem where none existed. Emily's heart sank. She had grown up believing that police officers were meant to protect, not intimidate. Yet here she was, standing on the street, feeling like a suspect for simply walking home. A part of her wanted to raise her voice, to protest, to tell them they were wrong. But another part of her knew that speaking too firmly might only make things worse. The street grew quieter. The shops were closing, and fewer people were around. The few bystanders who had stayed nearby seemed hesitant, glancing between their phones and the officers. Emily caught sight of one man who looked like he wanted to step forward, but he stopped himself, shook his head, and stayed where he was. She could read the fear on his face. No one wanted to argue with authority. One officer asked Emily for identification. She quickly reached into her bag and pulled out her student ID, holding it carefully so they could see it clearly. Her hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to keep her voice calm as she explained her college name and her course of study. The officer looked at the ID for a moment, then exchanged a look with his partner. Instead of handing it back, he kept it in his hand, walking around slowly as though he was trying to buy time. Emily stood there, feeling a growing pressure in her chest. She thought of her family, who always worried about her safety. Her mother often reminded her to call once she reached home, and tonight she hadn't done that yet. She wished she could take out her phone and send a message, but she feared it might be seen as an act of defiance. The officer's behavior became even more unsettling. They started asking strange questions, whether she knew people from certain neighborhoods, whether she had been at a certain location earlier in the week. Emily shook her head each time, explaining she didn't know what they were talking about. But no matter how politely she answered, their expressions grew harder, as if they didn't believe her. Her mind raced. Why were they treating her this way? Was it because she was walking alone at night? Was it because of how she looked? She wanted to believe there was a logical reason, but the more time passed, the clearer it became that they were not really interested in the truth. The tension in the air thickened. One of the officers moved closer, his shadow stretching across the pavement under the streetlight. Emily instinctively took a step back. She tried to stand tall, to show she wasn't afraid, but deep inside she felt trapped. The small group of bystanders shifted nervously. A few more phones were raised, their cameras catching every detail. Emily noticed them and felt a flicker of hope. At least there would be a record of what was happening. She clung to that thought, reminding herself that the truth had a way of coming out eventually. But in the moment, the truth didn't feel strong enough. The officer holding her ID asked her why she was nervous. Emily almost laughed at the question. How could she not be nervous when surrounded, questioned, and stared at so intensely? But she kept her voice steady, explaining that she was just cold and tired from studying. The officers didn't respond. Instead, they exchanged glances again. Their silence made Emily's stomach twist. She didn't know what they were planning, but she knew it wasn't going to end quickly. Minutes felt like hours. The sound of passing cars in the distance seemed far away, almost unreal. Emily's breathing grew shallow as she tried to think of what to do. Should she ask for her ID back? Should she try to leave? Or should she just stand still and hope this ended soon? None of the options felt safe. Suddenly, one of the officers asked her to step closer to the police car. Emily hesitated, her heart thumping against her ribs. She looked around, hoping someone would say something, but no one did. She wanted to refuse, but fear kept her feet moving. Slowly, she walked toward the car, her eyes fixed on the ground. Standing near the vehicle, the cold metal reflecting the street light, Emily felt more exposed than ever. The questions started again, faster this time, almost overlapping. Where had she been last night? Did she know anyone involved in certain activities? Did she understand the seriousness of lying to the police? Emily's throat felt dry. She tried to explain once more that she had nothing to do with any of those things. She even pointed to her books, telling them she had been buried in research all week. But her words seemed to dissolve in the air. The officer holding her ID finally handed it back, but the gesture didn't feel like relief. Instead, it felt like a test, as though they were watching her closely to see what she would do next. Emily slipped it back into her bag with trembling hands, trying to stay composed. The entire encounter felt like a storm, loud, heavy, and suffocating. Emily couldn't understand why she, of all people, was caught in the middle of it. She thought of her dreams, her studies, the simple life she wanted. And now here she was, standing in the cold night, unsure of what her next minute would hold. But what Emily didn't know was that the night had already started to shift. In the distance, the faint hum of engines grew louder. Dark vehicles approached, unnoticed by most people on the street. Within them sat people who had been watching, waiting for moments like this. Emily's fear was real, her confusion overwhelming, but the story wasn't over. She didn't yet know that her life, which had just taken a frightening turn, was about to change in a way no one could have predicted. Something was coming, and it was closer than she realized. The street had grown quieter, and Emily still stood near the police car, her mind racing. She felt trapped between fear and hope, not knowing what the next moment would bring. The officers continued to keep a close watch on her, as if waiting for her to slip up. Every second stretched longer, making the night feel endless. Then, out of nowhere, a sound began to rise in the distance. At first, it was faint, just the low hum of engines rolling down the road. Emily barely noticed it, too focused on the officers in front of her. But soon the sound grew louder, deeper, and heavier, cutting through the silence of the street. People nearby turned their heads, trying to see what was coming. In the glow of the streetlights, black SUVs appeared, their polished surfaces reflecting the orange lamps above. They moved with purpose, stopping near the corner where Emily and the officers stood. The air seemed to shift, as if everyone could sense that something important was about to happen. The police officers stiffened immediately. Their confident expressions flickered for the first time. Emily noticed the sudden change in their posture. They looked at each other quickly, their eyes revealing surprise and unease. It was clear they hadn't expected anyone else to arrive. The SUV's doors opened almost in unison, and several men and women in dark suits stepped out. Their movements were sharp, confident, and professional. Emily recognized the badges clipped to their jackets: the FBI. She blinked, hardly believing what she was seeing. For a moment, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her. Why would the FBI be here, on this quiet street, at this very moment? One of the agents walked forward quickly, his voice firm but calm. He addressed the officers directly, asking them what they were doing and why they had stopped Emily. His tone carried authority, the kind that couldn't be ignored. The officers hesitated, fumbling for words. Emily stood frozen, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure if she should speak or stay silent. The sudden presence of the FBI felt surreal, like something out of a story. Just minutes ago, she had been alone and powerless, but now the situation had completely shifted. The crowd of bystanders leaned closer, their phones still raised. Whispers spread quickly through the small group. No one had expected this. A few people even gasped softly, realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. The FBI agents spread out, forming a calm but clear boundary around the scene. One of them moved toward Emily, checking if she was okay. His voice was kind, his expression serious but reassuring. For the first time that night, Emily felt a tiny spark of relief. She nodded, her voice shaky as she said she was fine, though her trembling hands told another story. The officers tried to explain themselves, saying they were just doing their job, that they had every right to question her. But their words sounded weaker now, lacking the confidence they had shown moments earlier. The FBI agent in charge raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. He asked for their names, their badge numbers, and their reason for detaining a student without proper cause. Emily could see the discomfort on the officers' faces. The power they had shown earlier seemed to fade under the weight of the federal agent's presence. They shifted uncomfortably, no longer in control of the situation. The atmosphere on the street had transformed completely. Where there had been tension and fear, there was now a sense of justice arriving. The bystanders felt it too. Some of them lowered their phones, no longer afraid to be seen recording. Others whispered about how unusual it was for the FBI to show up in such a direct and dramatic way. Emily stood silently, watching everything unfold. Her thoughts swirled. How had this happened? Was it a coincidence? Had someone reported what was going on? Or had the FBI already been watching? She couldn't find the answers, but she knew one thing: she was no longer alone. One of the agents turned to Emily and gently asked her to explain what had happened. She described the encounter from the beginning, her words steady even though her voice shook. She explained how she had been walking home, how the officers had stopped her, and how the questions had grown stranger and more intimidating. The agent listened carefully, nodding, making sure she felt heard. When she finished, he assured her that her words mattered, that what she had experienced would be taken seriously. Emily felt her chest loosen slightly, as if a heavy weight was beginning to lift. Meanwhile, the other agents questioned the officers more firmly. They asked why she had been treated this way, why her bag had been searched without cause, and why she had been kept standing under the streetlight for so long. The officers tried to justify themselves, but their arguments grew thinner with every word. The bystanders could see it too: the balance of power had shifted. The officers who once seemed untouchable were now the ones being held accountable. For Emily, it was a moment she would never forget. As the scene unfolded, more agents arrived, making the street feel almost like a stage where justice was being acted out in real time. The officers who had intimidated Emily moments earlier now stood silent, unable to hide their unease. Emily realized that this was a turning point, not just for her night, but for something much bigger. What she didn't yet know was that the FBI had been investigating local cases of misconduct for weeks. Her encounter had happened at the exact moment when they were nearby, ready to act. The crowd around her grew more confident. A few people even stepped forward, offering to share the videos they had recorded. For the first time, Emily felt supported by strangers. She wasn't just a girl standing alone on a cold street anymore, she was the center of attention in a moment that was quickly turning into a fight for truth. The air was thick with emotions: shock, relief, curiosity. Emily's own emotions were tangled. She was still shaken, her body still tense, but beneath the fear was a flicker of strength. She realized that despite everything she had endured, she had faced the most frightening experience of her life, and now, against all odds, help had arrived. The FBI agents moved with quiet determination, their voices calm but commanding. Emily watched them and felt an unfamiliar comfort in their presence. She had no idea what the next steps would be, but for the first time that night, she believed she was safe. And so, what had started as an ordinary walk home had now turned into something much larger, a moment where truth stepped into the light, and where a girl who had felt invisible just minutes earlier became the reason justice had arrived. Emily could hardly believe what was happening. Just minutes ago, she had felt small and powerless, surrounded by officers who seemed determined to control her. But now, everything was different. The FBI agents stood firmly in front of her, questioning the officers with an authority that could not be ignored. The same officers who had spoken so harshly to her were now struggling to explain themselves. The lead agent, a tall man with a calm but commanding voice, repeated his question clearly: why was this young woman being held here without reason? The officers hesitated, their words stumbling. They claimed they were just doing a routine check, but their nervous tone gave away their unease. Emily stood silently, her eyes fixed on the scene. She could see the difference in body language. The officers who once appeared confident now shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the FBI's presence. The crowd of bystanders noticed it too, and a quiet energy spread through them. People who had been afraid to speak earlier now felt braver. One by one, several onlookers stepped forward. A young man raised his phone, showing the agents a recording of the entire incident. Another woman explained what she had witnessed, describing how Emily had been calm and respectful throughout, while the officers had grown increasingly forceful. Their voices added weight to the truth Emily had already shared. The agents listened carefully. They collected the evidence, took notes, and asked detailed questions. Every time a bystander spoke, Emily felt a little stronger. She realized she wasn't as alone as she had thought. Strangers had seen her pain and were willing to stand by her now. The FBI agents turned back to the officers. Their questions grew sharper, their tone firmer. The officers tried to defend themselves, but their explanations no longer held up. The evidence was clear. What had been meant to stay hidden in the shadows of a quiet street was now fully exposed under the watchful eyes of federal agents. Emily watched closely, her heart racing. She saw the agents calmly but firmly order the officers to step aside. Their badges were taken, and their radios removed. For the first time that evening, Emily felt a rush of relief. It was as though invisible chains that had been holding her down were finally breaking apart. The street, once filled with fear and tension, now carried a new kind of silence, a silence heavy with accountability. The crowd stood taller, whispering among themselves, some nodding in approval. It was a moment few had expected to see, authority figures being questioned and held responsible right in front of them. An agent gently approached Emily again, asking if she needed medical care. Emily hesitated at first, not wanting to appear weak, but the throbbing in her arms and the weight of the entire ordeal reminded her that she had been through more than enough. She nodded softly. The agent reassured her that she would be taken to a safe place where she could rest and receive proper attention. As she followed the agent toward one of the SUVs, Emily glanced back. The officers were standing silently now, surrounded by other agents. Their earlier dominance was gone, replaced by uncertainty and fear of the consequences they would face. Emily had never imagined seeing such a reversal of power. The bystanders began clapping quietly, a sign of support not just for Emily but also for the arrival of justice. The sound filled the night air, soft but meaningful. Emily's eyes welled up, not with sadness this time, but with gratitude. She realized that even though she had suffered, her struggle had not been ignored. Inside the SUV, the atmosphere was different. It was calm, professional, and safe. An agent offered her water, while another gently asked her to share her story once more in detail. Emily explained everything from the moment she left the library to the moment the FBI arrived. Her words flowed more easily now. She felt lighter, knowing she was being taken seriously by people who genuinely cared. The agent listened without interrupting, occasionally taking notes. When Emily finished, he assured her that what had happened would not be overlooked. He explained that the FBI had been monitoring reports of misconduct in the area for some time, and her case would become part of a much larger investigation. Emily sat back in the seat, letting the words sink in. The fear that had consumed her earlier was slowly replaced with a sense of hope. She wasn't sure what the future would hold, but she knew this night had changed everything. Meanwhile, outside, the officers were being taken into custody for questioning. The agents worked swiftly, making sure every detail was documented. The crowd of onlookers began to disperse, but not without sharing their videos and testimonies with the agents. The once ordinary street had become the scene of a powerful moment, one that would not be forgotten easily. Emily looked out the window of the SUV, watching the familiar streets roll by as they drove her to safety. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. The sidewalks, the lights, even the buildings seemed different now, as though the world had shifted in the space of a single evening. She thought about how quickly life could change. Just an hour earlier, she had been walking home with nothing on her mind but schoolwork. She had been just another student, another face in the crowd. And now, she was part of something far bigger than herself. The agent sitting beside her reminded her gently that she had shown great courage. He told her that not everyone could have remained calm under such pressure, and that her strength would help others in the future. Emily smiled faintly, though her eyes were still tired. She didn't feel like a hero, but hearing those words gave her comfort. As they approached the federal office, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. She was still shaken, still processing everything that had happened, but deep down, a new determination was beginning to grow. She realized that the world wasn't always fair, but moments like this proved that wrongs could be challenged, and justice could prevail. When she stepped out of the SUV, the night air felt different, cooler, calmer, almost refreshing. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The agents guided her inside, reassuring her that she was safe now. For Emily, this was more than just the end of a terrifying night. It was the beginning of something new. She knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she also knew she was no longer powerless. Her voice had been heard, and her story mattered. The girl who had once felt invisible on a quiet street now stood at the center of a story that would reach far beyond her own life. And though she didn't yet know what tomorrow would bring, she understood one simple truth: sometimes, even in the darkest of moments, light arrives when you least expect it. Emily sat quietly in the small office where the agents had brought her. The room was simple: plain walls, a desk, and a few chairs, but it felt safe. A kind agent placed a warm drink in front of her, reminding her that she was no longer alone. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. The fear that had gripped her heart for hours slowly began to loosen. As she sipped the drink, she thought about everything that had happened. It was almost impossible to believe that a normal evening walk had turned into such an unforgettable event. She thought of the officers who had stopped her, the way she had felt powerless, and then the sudden arrival of the FBI. It all felt like a dream, yet the ache in her body reminded her it was real. The lead agent entered the room, carrying a folder. He spoke gently, explaining that what had happened to her was part of a much bigger picture. For weeks, they had been investigating several complaints against certain officers in the area. Emily's case, he said, was the moment they had been waiting for, the clear evidence that connected everything together. Emily listened carefully, her hands folded in her lap. It was strange to think that her own painful experience would now become a turning point in a larger fight for justice. The agent assured her that her testimony, along with the videos from the bystanders, would play a crucial role. He also told her that she had been very brave, and that her voice had more power than she realized. Those words touched Emily deeply. All her life, she had believed in fairness, in the importance of standing up for what was right. Yet in that moment on the street, she had felt so small, so invisible. Now, hearing that her story could make a difference, she felt something new growing inside her. Hope. After finishing the report, the agents arranged for Emily to be taken home safely. They reminded her that she could reach out to them at any time if she needed help or had more details to share. As she left the office and stepped back into the night air, the world felt calmer. The sky was filled with stars, and the streets, though quiet, no longer seemed threatening. When Emily reached her apartment, she finally called her mother. Her voice cracked as she told her everything. At first, her mother gasped in fear, but as Emily described how the FBI had arrived and protected her, her mother's tears turned into relief. "You are safe," she repeated over and over. Emily closed her eyes, letting the comfort of those words sink in. Over the next few days, news of the incident spread. Videos from the bystanders had circulated, and soon the story was everywhere. Headlines spoke of the unexpected arrival of the FBI and how a young student's experience had exposed a deeper issue. People in the community began to talk openly about their own encounters, and slowly, the silence that had once protected wrongdoing started to break. Emily was surprised by how many people reached out to her. Friends, classmates, even strangers sent her messages of support. Some called her courageous, while others thanked her for speaking out when they themselves had been too afraid. Emily didn't see herself as a hero, but she realized that sometimes courage is simply surviving a moment and refusing to be silent afterward. The officers involved faced serious consequences. Investigations continued, and justice began to take its course. Emily followed the updates quietly, not out of anger, but because she wanted to see that truth was being respected. She knew she could never erase what had happened to her, but seeing accountability brought her peace. At college, Emily returned to her classes. Her professors and classmates welcomed her warmly, some even saying they were proud of her. Sitting in the same library where it had all begun, she felt stronger. The girl who once doubted her own voice now understood its value. She wasn't just a student anymore, she had become a symbol of resilience in her community. In the weeks that followed, Emily decided to use her experience for something greater. She joined local groups that worked to promote fairness and support people who felt powerless. She shared her story at small gatherings, not to relieve the pain, but to remind others that even when things seem darkest, there is always a chance for light to break through. She noticed how people listened carefully to her words. Some nodded in agreement, others wiped away quiet tears. Emily realized that her pain had not been wasted. It had been transformed into something that could inspire others to stand tall, even in difficult times. Late one evening, as she walked home again, she thought back to that night. She passed the same streetlight where everything had happened. For a moment, she paused, staring at the spot that had once filled her with fear. The memory was still heavy, but now it no longer controlled her. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come. The quiet glow of the lamp seemed different that night, softer, almost comforting. Emily smiled faintly to herself. She knew she would never forget what she had endured, but she also knew it had shaped her into someone stronger. Her life returned to its routines, but she carried a new determination with her. She studied harder, focused on her goals, and dreamed even bigger. She promised herself that she would continue to speak up, not just for herself but for others who might feel voiceless. Emily's story became more than just an incident. It became a reminder for everyone who heard it that truth can never be completely silenced, and that even in the most unexpected moments, justice can arrive. For Emily, the night that had once seemed like the end of her piece had actually become the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where she was no longer just a student walking home. She was someone who had faced injustice and lived to tell the story, someone who had turned fear into strength, and silence into a voice that would not be forgotten. And as she walked forward into her future, Emily carried with her one simple belief, that even in the hardest times, there is always hope, and that courage, no matter how small it feels in the moment, has the power to change everything.